Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Maryann Petri. There's a non-denominational retreat weekend at the Resolution Center of Jacksonville, Florida. This will be a time of support and renewal for parents and grandparents on the journey of parental alienation, standing strong in resilience, paving the way for good health and a great future. This will take place April 22nd through the 24th at the Resolution Center of Jacksonville, Florida. I will have the details in the podcast notes. Right now, I have a brand new guest. Her name is Teri Yaki Cahoon, and she's a volunteer teacher and relief worker, Air Force veteran, foster parent, adoptive homeschooling mom, and biological mother after multiple child losses, biological, adoptive, and foster. She has married someone of the same sex before the Supreme Court ruling, which retroactively put her name on her daughter's birth certificate. She thought she was living a dream until the other party tricked her into signing a document that allowed her to sell the house, move out of the state, and also demand that she follow with the two children, or the children. 2 months later, she was locked out of her home and was reaching out for her children who were forced into an apartment building by people who posed as friends. Her oldest adopted son was used to slander her in two main court cases that began a journey to fight for her own biological daughter and her closest in-age adopted brother across 3 states in 4 households in only 5 years. We have a lot to talk about here with Teri. We're going to talk about legalizing gay marriage invited a whole new level of marketing children, and how lesbians are at risk of being first world sex slaves, and the national crisis of judicial abuse, which is, can be a gender issue, income issues, race issue, preferential opinion issue, and none of it is legal. And we're going to talk to Teri right now. We've got a lot to say. Welcome to the show, Teri.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me come on. I've heard some of your podcasts and have really enjoyed how you brought out a lot of truth from other people's stories. It's difficult to see the reality of truth when you're in the midst of the trauma that they cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea. I had no idea how much worse it could get. When I was serving in the Air Force under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I saw a lot of abuse of authority. I saw a lot of people use corrupt policies to harm people. And after 11 or 12 years since I've been discharged, I've only been service connected as a veteran for close to 2 years. So that means I spent a decade as a veteran, not connected to the VA, not receiving services, no benefits, no health care for that
Mm-hmm.
entire time. And that was the season when I started my family. So I walked into an illegal marriage, quote unquote, illegal, because at that time and in the state that we lived in, we couldn't be married because we had the same sex.
Mm-hmm.
So we went out of state. Within 3 months of my discharge, we were living in her home state of where she grew up, her home state. We left and went, 4 or 5 states north. It was at the time there were only 3 states that married same-sex couples. And so we got married and we went back and we started our family, but we lived the benefits of two single women. As a foster parent, received food stamps and ABC vouchers and a lot of the government assistance that would have been withheld had we been married officially. And I was a foster parent for about 6 years, cycling in and out of the home of probably 17, 16 different children or more. And at one point, it was licensed for as many as 5 children, and I've had that many in my care. I have stacks and stacks of letters of people who will tell you from that season that I was a good parent. I took from a very nurturing childhood what I was taught, and I made a good life despite the heartbreak that I carried, that my own nation, that my military service was disrespected simply because of my orientation. That I carried that pain with me through all those years. but I was making a life, and I was doing the best that I could. And that doesn't mean I was perfect. Anytime you tell a story, there's always a flip side.
Mm,
So if we were to hear the other side, there would be parts of the story that would tell you I'm not perfect, and I don't deny that.
mm,
When the boys were adopted, there were two boys, non-biological, who were adopted in the summer of 2014. My then spouse thought it would be a good idea to have a biological child. I was a little bit hesitant because I had tried years before and had had a miscarriage. Again, that's a lot of that pain that I carried with me
mhm,
for a very long time. Um, and so we sat down and we came up with some agreements. Much of the agreements that led to my conceiving a child were the exact same agreements that that were agreed on when the boys were adopted. And much of that agreement was started when one of those two boys came into my home at the age of 10 days old. I said, look, I said to the other person, I said, listen, I can't take in a 10-day-old baby. If I'm working full time, this kid's got health problems. He,
mhm,
he had a lot of health issues that took 24/7 care. I said, if I'm taking this child in, that means you're earning the income and I'm taking care of the children. And she agreed to that. I said, that's going to put a lot of pressure on you, but I'm talking about many, many years here.
mhm,
We need to make a plan long term, even if the foster child, you know, doesn't stay with us that long. We have to have a plan just in case.
mhm,
So we made that plan when he came in. We reiterated that plan that I was the full-time parent, that I was the caregiver before the boys were adopted. And moments before home insemination, I
mhm,
looked at this other person and I said, I need to make sure that you're in this for the long haul.
mhm,
Okay. I'm not creating a child to cause pain. I said those words.
mm,
As she reiterated, I'm not going anywhere.
mhm,
By the time my daughter was 2 years old, the Supreme Court had decided our marriage was legal. We had lost a lot of the government benefits like food stamps because her then income became my income. That's the way marriage works. It
mhm,
puts two incomes together. And there are a lot of advantages to it. I understand that. But in our case, it became a difficulty because our budget dropped so drastically from having different government assistance to suddenly not having it because we weren't worthy of marriage, and now suddenly you're recognized as a married couple.
mhm,
By the time my daughter was 2 years old, all of those benefits were gone. We were recognized as legally married, and she was planning to move out of state because her first two bachelor's degrees and first two master's degrees were not enough. She wanted a third master's degree to start what would have been the third career or third job opportunity in that 6.5 year relationship.
wow.
And I wasn't
Mm,
necessarily opposed to the move because I never really fit well into her very Southern culture.
mhm,
I had some good friends, and they are good friends to this day. They've written letters to every judge and attorney that they can get a hold of, telling the truth about what happened. They have been very actively involved in this story.
mhm,
And at least one of them, possibly two of them, said, something's wrong. Something's not right here. You should not go to that other state. All I could see was that my spouse was leaving
mhm,
and that I had made promises to that person to love, honor, and support.
mhm,
And to me, that part of that support was making sure that those dreams and vocational goals were met.
mhm,
So when she came to me and said, we're selling the house and you have to sign this because you've lived here for X number of years, and the house was in her name, um, and so I signed it. And it wasn't a month later that she said, oh yeah, and by the way, when we get to the new state of residence, you have 2 months to get out. And I'm like, okay, you're emotional. You're moving away from your mommy for the first time in your near 30 years of life, or at that point, maybe around 30 years of life. Um, and it never occurred to me that in that moment of emotion, what she was saying suddenly became law. More than the 6.5 years of agreements and active parenting, more than marriage license, whatever that toilet paper means.
Mhm.
That one comment became the foundation for everything that would occur from that point forward. So she moved, packed up the house, took all the stuff. I took a couple of weeks to visit friends and family on the way up a few states, and they all said, I don't feel right about this. Something's
Mm.
wrong. Something's not right. She's like, what's going on? Why is she behaving this way?
Oh.
Everyone noticed that there was a giant shift in her communication and in her emotions. So
Mm.
I get up there, and we're living in what's called temporary student housing, because the campus housing was brand new,
Mhm.
for families, that is. And you know how it is with historical landmarks. The school is, and so they found some historical thing, and it slowed down opening the dorms at the beginning of the semester. So all of these families were put into various off-campus apartments, and that's where we lived for 2 months. I hadn't worked in over 6 years, or 4 years, excuse me. I'd been a full-time parent. I didn't have education. I certainly didn't have 4 degrees to stand on as she had. But it was my obligation to find housing, so that when she moved from the temporary student housing to the on-campus student housing, I would be out of the way.
I'm so sorry.
It was a very difficult season, but I'm a
Mm.
very resilient person, and I'm
Mhm.
very determined, and I grew up without having a lot, and I know how to make ends meet.
Mhm.
And it was a miracle, because that area that she chose to live in, as most of her choices are quite affluent. They're not for the average person. They're for people whose income is a minimum of 35,000, and you have to have X number of months or years to present to even be worthy to apply to housing there. So I couldn't live where she chose to live. I had to live in the next county over. And it was nothing short of a miracle how housing popped up for someone like me, who had been working for 2 months. I had been working for 2 months, driving a new to me car
Mhm.
overnight for Uber. Now, in the DC metro, that's not a bad gig if you can
Mhm.
put in 70 to 80 hours a week, as most of the drivers there do. But that's very difficult when
Mm.
you're a mom, when you're a full-time mom,
Mhm.
when you're going through a lot of emotional conflict.
Mhm.
But I was determined to make it work. On November, I think it was 18th of 2016, that was about 2 months. That was that 2-month marker. The moving truck was packed with her stuff in the back and my stuff in the front. And they took my stuff to this house, a basement apartment, really, really small. And the landlord said, you don't really have what we look for to give you a full year's lease. And I said,
Mhm.
I know, but can you give me a chance?
Mhm.
He said, yeah, I'll give you a chance. I said, I will give you a year lease, and I will give you a chance, but you've got to make this work. So that's where they dumped all my stuff. I,
Mm.
I went to the preschool to pick up the children, and they weren't there. And so I went over to the housing where my name is on the lease, because I'm a part of the family that's moving into the family student housing. And she comes barreling out, what are you doing here? The anger.
Mhm.
I had seen it before, but not to that extent. I just remember, like, these people who had, 3, 4 months before, in trying to convince us to move there, were telling me this will be good for your family. Those were the people who picked up my children and took them into the building and slammed the door. My daughter's crying out for mommy. My son is reaching out for me. I
Mm.
was like, I remember just being confused. You know
Mhm.
that feeling you get
Mhm.
when you're on one of those ridiculous amusement park rides, when you're spinning around super fast
Mhm.
and it's supposed to be fun?
Mm.
That's not fun,
No.
especially when you're standing on firm ground and that's what you're feeling. That's not fun. I remember at one
Mm.
point, this other person, like, just getting mad because I was calling someone and slamming my phone onto the ground, which broke it, of course.
Mhm.
I went to the grass and I was praying. Um, and long story short, when the police came, they told me that my name was not on the lease and I wasn't allowed into that housing and that I couldn't even say goodbye to my children.
Mm.
I went to the middle school and I called my son out and I said, listen, I don't know exactly what's going on, but you're supposed to go to this other person's housing. So for the last 2 months, he had left middle school and walked to the temporary family housing. And I wanted to make sure he knew where he was going.
Mhm.
So I told him to go there because that's what the police said, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And they're the law enforcers, right?
Mhm.
So I I did that. And then I went to work and I set up my apartment. And at some point, 22 months later, we went to court. And all that they could do was mock me because on November 18th, 2016, I cried
Mhm.
over my children.
Mhm.
I prayed in public, and they decided that that was an emotional breakdown, a temper tantrum, um, that I was mentally unstable, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to consolidate a ridiculous trauma story that at that point I didn't even recognize was trauma. So for the 10 months that followed, my older son was ordered to live with the other person who was very close to his middle school, and the younger two children were in my primary care. And I was like, that doesn't seem quite right. Why am I being thrown out of my home and losing majority of time with my oldest son and nothing is done about it? Like that
Mhm.
didn't make sense to me at the time,
Mhm.
but I didn't have time to analyze their problem. I had two children to take care of, I had a job to maintain, I had to pay the rent, and I did. For 3 years, I lived in that basement apartment and I never missed rent once.
Mhm.
And I had utilities, I had a fridge, I had food. And that's nothing short of a miracle because when you look at it on paper, it
Mhm.
doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But
Mhm.
I believe in providence and I believe that God takes care of the people who are vulnerable and suffering. I
Mhm.
truly do. It doesn't always feel like it when you're in the moment, but
Mhm.
God does take care.
Mhm. I agree.
And then she finished that degree. At that point, we'd been there for almost 3 years. She finished the degree that she went and she got a job 7 hours away. So we went back to court. Remind you, when I was thrown out of my home and asked for help, it took 22 months for us to get to court. When she finishes her degree and wants to move the children 7 hours away, it took less than 3 months to get to court. So we got to rush in, and all that they can do is mock me, slander me. Um, they sent a guardian ad liar to my house,
Mhm.
and she spent about 3 hours creeping around. And then she wrote a report about it. Well, the report is fairly accurate. My daughter climbed a tree. Okay. And my daughter crossed the road, a quiet cul-de-sac road in the middle of the workday with me standing right there in the yard, 100 feet from the edge.
Mhm.
But when she told the story to the court, I was dangerous
Mhm.
because my daughter climbed a tree and she ran across the road without looking. I'm
Mhm.
like, but wait, what's going on?
Mhm.
And that ultimately is the reason why the same judge, whom I had asked to recuse herself several times, by the way, um, decided to give all of three of the children to this other person and gave her permission to move them 7 hours away from me. And that was the end of that. I was ordered to um, drive about 4.5 to 5 hours once a month to see my children in a hotel. for a weekend. That's the only time that I was given with my children. Now, keep in mind, in that 3 years, I haven't had a vacation.
Mm-mm.
I don't drive 4 or 5 hours to spend the night in a hotel. I haven't spent the night in a hotel in a really long time, okay?
Mhm.
Because I can't afford that. I don't
Mhm.
make that kind of money. I don't vacation once a month. Not to mention the fact that my work is chaplaincy. I work in religious settings. Well, guess when a lot of religious gatherings are? On the
Mhm.
weekend.
Mhm.
So now you've not only um, created a major financial issue, you're literally blocking my job, which was not the first time the judge had done that. Between the first and the second court case, she had ordered me only to work 4 hours at a time. If I was driving rideshare and the children were in my custody, I was only allowed to drive 4 hours at a time. That was the order. If I needed to work more than 4 hours at a time, then I had to give the children to the other parent. Even if it was the middle of the night and they were sleeping and I was hiring someone to come in and sit on the couch, and it was a young college student, it's a good
Mhm.
family friend of ours, I was only allowed to do that for 4 hours. So this is not the first time that it appeared to be a very deliberate vocational destruction. So she said, we'll be back in a week to make the final order. Okay, fine. So my mother and my two younger children and I packed up and we drove 7 hours north. Overnight, with my mom and dad's help, I had 3 different housing options to go look at and 2 different job interviews.
Hmm.
So we drove 7 hours north and we got a hotel, which my mother paid for because I couldn't afford it. And
Oh,
I went
thank
to
God for
interviews.
parents.
I know, right? My parents have been very involved in this,
Mhm.
although they are from a religious background that does not support same sex
Mhm.
marriages at all. They have been very supportive of the children, and I don't think I could have survived that much degradation had they not been there to witness it and come out saying, I would have never believed it if I
Mhm.
hadn't seen it. So we drove up and we looked around, and I found a house and I felt confident enough that I could take the ride share up there, and I'd had a couple of interviews. So when we went back to court for the final order, I said, oh, by the way, Judge, I'm moving up there. I'm going to live 2 miles away from the children. And she said, okay, fine. You can have every other weekend, but not overnights. And you can see them on Wednesday evenings for 3 hours, but they're not spending the night with you. I'm like, what? So for the past 2.5 years, I have maintained a house with bedding, clothing, and food for me and 3 children. They come for 3 hours on Wednesday evening for dinner, and they come on every other Saturday, Sunday, but not to spend the night because I'm so dangerous that we could take that trip and plan this life and spend the night with family and be together for that week but I was so dangerous when I moved north that they couldn't spend the night with me. And we all know that this is not legal.
Mhm.
There's no basis for anything that they have done.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. It's also not really a courtroom. If you really think about it, it's just a probate court. It really is, there is no jury. I don't know how your
Yep.
transcripts read, if you have all your transcripts and if they were right, if there were things missing out of them, I don't know, but these are not normal courtrooms, and I think people need to know that, and I'm glad you said that.
Well, I'm gonna take your word normal and make the statement that there's no such thing as a normal family courtroom
Right.
because there's no statement, there's no law, there's no standard. It varies from state to state. It varies from county to county, which was true in my case because
Mhm.
I had to live in the poor people's county. And it varies from judge to judge within
Mhm.
a county. it also varies from case to case. With the same judge can look at the same situation with two different people, and one mother gets their children and the other mother is like has to pay. As I have a friend who had the same judge, and she has to pay upwards of $300 an hour to visit her child with some government sponsored babysitter. That's the only time she gets to see her child, a couple hours a month, if she can afford to pay for it. And it's the same judge, the same judge and the same guardian ad litem. We now have four mothers and a father. And I say a father because he was actually the son of the person who was abused by this particular judge.
Mm,
This is getting bigger and bigger
it
because of
is.
this judge. So there's no such thing as normal, and that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
When gay marriage was legalized, we looked at it as, okay, well, if they can get married, we should be allowed to as well. We should get a tax break. We should get housing incentives. All
Mm-hmm.
of those great reasons that we think we have to pay the government to approve our relationships, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if it saves us money, let's do it, okay? The problem is the money that you think you're saving is actually paying them to make opinions that they have no right making. They have no right to make a decision over my relationships and especially my children.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what that marriage license means.
Mm-hmm.
It's a deed. It's a deed. It's giving someone else permission. And the statement that you made, I am very concerned that people are using this marriage license to trick someone else into having a child.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see in my story, biology doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Biology was originally the foundation for the family court, quote unquote, family court. I don't think we should call it that because
No.
families don't go there.
Mm-mm.
Broken, traumatized, scared as hell people go there. That's not family. So this corporation is now deciding who gets to keep the children based on these standards built on heteronormative expectations and standards, but it doesn't even apply. I am the only one who got stitches in my twat bringing that child into the world, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
is no biology, there is no DNA. The only thing that gives this other person ownership of my daughter is a license that, as I made the statement before, is little more than toilet paper. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean anything. They can't make you keep your promise. They only use the promise to somehow establish ownership of a child. And that's why I make the statement that the birth certificate is now the new slave document.
Mm-hmm.
Who owns this human being? And it
I
scares
agree
me.
with you. Yes, I completely agree with you that even when people sign a marriage license, now they are wards of the state. You sign this document because I always said, why do we have to sign this document? Why does a church need to have the marriage license in order to marry the couple? You know, why can't the church just or a church just marry two people? Why is a government certificate have to be involved? And
Yep,
why, when a baby is born, they're a number now.
yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, I'm actually glad that you did because this is a good time to tell you that my job as an interfaith chaplain is walking the line between religions. And I spend a lot of time looking at the commonalities and the differences. There are a lot of churches, there are a lot of synagogues, and there probably have always been more mosques that don't require the marriage license. And it's getting to the point now where a lot of these religious institutions are saying, if you're going to get legally married, you're going to have to get somebody else to preside because I
Mhm,
don't want to have a part in that. Because we're realizing now how that concept of colonial, patriarchal, monarchical ownership, and now we're looking at what happens when those concepts stay in our psyche for years and years and years.
mhm.
and it is abuse. It always was. And we have to find a way to maneuver through this culture without setting ourselves up for this type of abuse. I've had a lot of people look at my case and they'll say, this is insane. Like, I've seen this with bio parents, but I've never seen this with lesbians before.
Mhm.
Like, how in the world did they sell your children like that? Like, your own biological daughter. And nobody can explain that
Mhm.
because there's no system, there's no reason. And I need to say that again, there's no reason. Okay. I do believe that there's a lot of gender preference. I do believe there's a lot of race issues going on with the Broken Family Corporation. They have their own opinions about income. And a lot of times
Mhm.
they do that. Oh, well, you make more money. You must be the better parent. You take the children. Doesn't matter that, you're the reason the other person has a stack of emergency room visits that we just conveniently don't want to allow into the courtroom.
Mhm.
I've seen it.
Mhm.
I work with these parents. It's my job now as protective parents chaplain. I see these cases all the time. And what gives me a little bit of advantage is that I can look at these moms and say, yes, I do know what that feels like.
Mhm.
I do know what it feels like. And most of them give me a little bit more credibility when they recognize that we didn't even have makeup sex one night and end up with this kid.
Mhm.
This kid was planned. This child
Mhm.
was planned and paid for and worked for and agreed on. And I just didn't know at the time that words mean nothing.
Mhm.
And you cannot hold anyone accountable to their verbal agreements. You have to have it in writing. Everything.
Mhm.
Everything has to be in writing. I didn't know that.
So then your advice to people would be to go to an attorney and drop a document somewhat to a prenuptial.
Yes, I don't know what it's called, but it's basically a prenuptial for every single child that you create, whether it's in vitro or home insemination or however you choose to do the one night stand at the bar. I'm not telling you how to make your babies, okay? I'm just saying you need to have a legal document of ownership with every what if scenario that could ever possibly happen. And it's going to be big and it's going to be long and it's going to be more expensive than the same sex family structure already is,
Mhm.
because we don't get the advantages of just creating a child. We have to work for it and pay for it. And this is a part of it.
Mhm.
Or you are setting yourself up for this kind of abuse.
And this abuse leads to a lot of things that people don't see coming or realize this is going to happen with the
Yep.
parent-child relationship.
Yep. That's
And
exactly right.
and what happened to you in court with the accusations that you're mentally ill, etcetera. You know,
Right.
these judges use these and the opposing team use these as massive bombs on these poor parents.
Right. The issue is with me, I was ordered to get a psychological evaluation, which I'd already done before because as a military veteran who had a top secret military clearance, I'd already
Mhm.
had that kind of thing done. I knew what to expect. So I paid a full month's gross business income to buy a psychological evaluation that repeatedly says there is nothing that interferes with parenting. And yet, that document, now 2 years old, is still not being used to restore any sense of honor and decency to the relationship between me and my children. I'm still having to buy my days in court. I'm still having to buy all these other absurd orders, most of which can't even be done. For example, the judge in the last state of residence ordered me to get a home study in the new state of residence. Hadn't seen the home, wasn't concerned about the home, wasn't a report of any problems in the home in the old state of residence, but just to be vindictive, this order was made. Well, in the new state of residence, there's two ways to get a home study done. One, pay $2,000 for a private adoption company, okay, who won't give you a home study, by the way, unless you've already paid an excessive amount of application fees for the private adoption, right?
Mhm.
Or You have to go through the state system. Guess who starts the state system? A local authority. So almost 2.5 years after this order was made, I've been making phone calls for that amount of time, and nobody knows how to do it because the local authority hasn't started the ball rolling. You can't do that with some random vindictive judgment from 3 states away. They're literally making it impossible for good parents to buy back their own children. And that's why you see my blog, you'll read my book, you'll hear me speak, and I use terms like the broken family corporation because they are.
Mhm.
That's not a court system. It's not democratic, and it's not American. You'll hear me use the terms buy, sell, trade, child market because that's exactly what it is.
Mhm.
They're doing this to make a profit and build their power. And we, the people, have to stop it. They're using the court system. These abusive spouses and abusive parents are using the court systems, and it's domestic violence by proxy. Oh, well, I didn't hit her, so I'm not the problem. Actually, you are. You just accused me of mental illness that has been proven a false allegation. That's called slander and defamation of character, and it's illegal. And yet you still keep my children away from me when I have a safe and excellent home life and a heritage of faith and family that they have been stolen from.
Teri, do you think when you go back into court, do you really think this judge has even gone through the documents that have happened in the past? Even your income,
Well, my income doesn't look any better. We'll put it that way.
but yet they're probably imputing you at some higher amount than what you make.
The judge in the last state of residence did that, yes. They recorded my income at 4 times the amount that I actually earned. And that is why I'm now in debt because I've been trying to pay my abuser for stealing my children. I was ordered to pay 40% of the medical expenses, which seems like a great way to make a parent responsible for their children, except when the decision maker makes 5 times more money and has the most expensive health insurance plan in the state and buys glasses for an 8-year-old that are a retail price of $415. First pair of glasses for a child.
Mm-mm.
I'm responsible for 40% of that. Will the judge see why? I don't know. But I can tell you one thing. I had a meeting recently, like one of those remote hearings, and they decided that we have to go to court, which I already knew was the case because there's no way to resolve a case like this in a 20-minute remote hearing. Like, it's just not possible.
Mhm.
And for the first time, I sat almost calm. My heart
Mm.
was racing, of course, but I was almost calm because for the past 3 years, while my children have been deprived of their mother, I have been working on trauma healing. And that's why I want to say to anyone listening who's been through this, I know what it feels like to be in trauma mode when you're in front of your abusers. And that's what they are. They are your abusers. They are the perpetrators. Yes, I know there's people who claim to be following the law and they're supposed to be protecting the children. You know, they use those
Mhm.
catchphrases like betterment of the children or best interest of the children. They don't have any clue what that means. I
Mm-mm.
know that. I know what it feels like. I've been spending the last 3 years ultra focused on mental health, grounding techniques, breathing techniques, communication skills, conflict resolution. Like, this has become my job
Mhm.
as a chaplain, but also as a trauma survivor.
Mhm.
And we have to stop saying that when I get my children back, I'll be okay again. No, you need to start being okay right now. It is now your job to get well.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, but you have to start that journey, it is crucial. We have to be dedicated to surviving and healing, because our parenthood is not contingent on our children's presence.
Mhm.
Neither is our mental health. What they are doing is intentional. It is a military tactic. Give you a little bit of nice thing and then attack, 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 attack with
Mhm.
words. That is a military strategy to wear down informants. And that is what they are using, not in warfare, but in a court system where they're
Mhm.
supposed to be protecting citizens. And the majority of people who are suffering this way are, in fact, law abiding citizens.
Mhm.
They're not criminals, but they're being treated as if they were a criminal. They're being treated as if they're being interrogated by a military system.
Do you find, and this is kind of what I've noticed in, well, I don't even want to call it a courtroom, but the judge will um, kind of give the other party who's winning a slap on the wrist for, say, a contempt. And it seems like, it sounds like our stories are the same, but we seem like very highly honest people. And I've heard that highly honest people really get thrashed in a courtroom, whereas they reward the emotionally or physically abusive parent
Yep.
and give them the children, while the honest parent, the target parent, everything's taken away.
Yes. That is a very true statement. And for those who have been through military training, you will know that that is exactly what it looks like. You find the weakest link in the flight, the unit, or the squadron, whatever your term is, because each branch uses a different term. And that weakest link becomes the one person that the sergeant goes after constantly, constantly, constantly to demonstrate where the problem is, to break down the unit. Because
Mhm.
until you get to that point where you have nowhere to turn and nothing else, that is when you look at the sergeant and say, yes sir, what is the order, sir? And that is how you form an obedient, well-trained military personnel who can go into a war zone and do what they're told, no matter how difficult it is. The problem is that's the tactic being used in the court system with parents who are traumatized and they didn't sign up to go to war. And yet that's exactly what they're having to do. And they're not being built up. They're just being expected to say, yes, judge, what next, sir?
Mhm.
That is not what the court system is for.
Exactly, and also, what was brought up by a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot of opposing attorneys, but they bring up and they'll shoot out also an allegation of parental alienation.
Yeah. Parental
And
alienation is that hot button term. We could also just say parental deprivation.
mhm,
I've heard it both ways. It's kind of those conflict term. It's one of those conflict terms because it started as abuse, and yet now it's a psychologically recognized issue. It is in the CDC. I mean, excuse me, it is in the DSM-5. It's there. Like it's a legitimate problem. And yet, when you get it to the court system, if you use that term, it could very likely end up being um, used against you.
mhm,
Just like when you say, oh well, that person sexually abused my daughter. Oh, okay,
mhm.
well that means you must have sexually abused your own daughter. But what? That's not what I said. That's not
Mhm,
what the emergency room reports say. That's not what the pediatrician says. That's not what 52 other witnesses say.
mhm,
And yet, that's what is. That's what we're going to decide.
mhm. Well, it's like when the opposing attorney called out parental alienation on my case, I'm looking at it, I'm going, "What are you talking about?" Because I just, I'm just too honest and too nice. I just was like, just shocked that he would bring that up when none of
Yeah,
this was ever happening. They bring up
right.
false narratives, and that leads us
Yep.
to another topic, which should be personality disorders that these opposing counsel and their clients have, which could be either borderline, like high functioning borderline personality disorders, or high functioning, I want to say narcissism, bipolar,
You need an
borderline.
you need an LPC for that. That's not my, I don't do a whole lot with personality disorders, but
Mhm,
I understand why you're saying that. I agree that there's some truth to it, but I'll warn you, in going at this from that angle, is that they could do the same thing. If you start using a soft science like psychology to
mhm,
attack people, you
mhm,
better be prepared for them to use it back at you.
mhm. Well, we never did. We've just been noticing, and parents have been talking about how they have been abused and the gaslighting, and it seems
Yes.
to be coming from very highly intelligent people.
Yeah.
And these highly intelligent people have now, and they don't want to say label, but have been referred to as narcissists.
Yeah.
And the thing is that judges are attracted to these people. And I think this is why
Yeah.
the good parent, the target parent, is losing, because the judge is identifying with this parent who has the higher income, as you said, and um, is presenting in a way that attracts the judge.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of that, because that's how monarchy worked. Our court system came from an English system where you had to do things and say things and look a certain way in order to be considered credible. And
Mhm,
we still use that term, what witness is credible, what person can be believed, that type of thing. All of that came from an English monarchical system. It was never democratic.
mhm, mhm,
It never fit into the American concept of protection and truth. And that's why it looks so ridiculous to us now, because we're
mhm.
seeing what happens when we take the wrong principles and try to build a system on it.
And it's not working. Nothing is working. People are trying to somehow get this court system to function. And I know that's not even the right word because it's not functioning.
Yeah. The court case that's coming up next month is partly because I'm trying to fight for my children, but it's also because the response of me trying to get 50% time with my own children is that the other party wants to move them again, which would make this the fifth move in 5 years across not 3 states, but 4 states. We have to stop segregating over the gender issue and the race issue and the income issue and all these other possible reasons, and stop thinking that my reason is the only reason. And we have to stop segregating, and we have to start uniting to end this immunity. Without attorneys, without jury, as you mentioned, only criminals get juries. Only criminals get court appointed attorneys. We get nothing. And
Mhm,
we have to stop that. And we have to find a way to build our families and hold people accountable to what they promised their children. They're not cars, they're not houses. And we have to start finding a way to build a democratic family system, because we don't have it.
I've been hoping that family court would soon be abolished at some point soon because there's so many parents that have lost everything. We're talking target parents. Yeah.
And you don't get it back. We're not just talking about the
Mhm,
children, we're talking about our income, our
mhm,
mental health, our jobs, our location. We've lost our extended families
mhm,
because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with holidays when only one person comes and the entire rest of the family hasn't been seen for a decade.
mm, mhm,
When you say that we've lost everything, I need you to point out that it's not just the children.
mhm.
It's everything. And
And
that's
even
why we have to work on our mental health and
mhm,
build our spiritual practice and hold ourselves to a very high standard of, I know I'm interfaith, so hopefully these terms won't conflict with another person's faith, but mindfulness, meditation practice,
mhm,
prayer, calming rituals, binding rituals. Like I could sit here for hours. I could sit here for hours and tell you about what I have tried to use to help heal myself, because the courts are not going to help you do it.
mhm,
They're just going to find the scab and attack it and attack it and attack it and attack it. And if you don't start building and healing, it's just going to get worse, because they're
mhm.
not going to stop attacking you.
Tell me about your book.
Sure. It was published in summer 2020, and you can get it on Amazon. The title of it is Yaki Plus 3, An American Account of a Birthing Lesbian. And it gives you a little background of an excellent childhood, what happened when I was in service and in military service. The years before that I spent teaching English overseas. I was a volunteer relief worker. Um, I'm a decent person. I've
Mhm,
lived a very full life. And a lot of that is foundation for getting me here to be able to speak, not only because of my experience, but to be able to speak on behalf of a lot of parents who cannot articulate what's going on because we don't have services for us.
mhm,
And that's the book is just the narrative. The sequel, whenever I get it done, is going to be a little bit more of a devotional and
mhm,
talking about not just what happened, but what I've learned from it and what I'm going to do with it. So write your story, practice it in front of a mirror, your little elevator speech, and you keep doing that until you can tell your trauma story in about 3 to 4 sentences and make it poignant and make it use those terms that get people thinking, because that's going to help you heal. It's going to help you grow. That book is a part of my healing,
mhm,
was writing it down and just letting that be the story. That's my case. That's my story. That's my narrative. And now I'm going to work on what to do with it.
mhm,
How do I use all of this pain to create a life that is full and rich and joyful?
mhm.
And then I'm going to tell everybody else how to do it. That's my goal,
That's
because
excellent.
we've got to stop sitting in the trauma and start living in the healing.
I agree with you. Because when your kids come back, they need to see a healthy, whole parent.
Give them something to come back to.
Right.
Yes, I like that thought.
Definitely. I agree with you. And I agree with, the meditation process. Um, I had interviewed Peggy Wegener about possibly 2 weeks ago. She talked about TRE, trauma response, and there's certain exercises people can do to help let go of trauma. It doesn't happen
Yes,
overnight.
yes. Listen, I have a dream.
Mhm,
Petri, listen, I have a dream. We're going to start a center, and it's going to
mhm,
be a place where parents can come to after these judges steal their children. We're going to have yoga. We're going to have
mhm,
EMDR. We're going to have therapies, and we're going to have groups, and we're going to get clean. We're going to get people off of drugs and alcohol. And I'm going to say this right now: if that's your response system, stop it. It's not going to get any better. I don't do alcohol, drugs, smoke, tobacco, chew, nothing. All right. I'm not saying that's the only way to live, but right now, when you're in trauma, that's the only way to live. Because if you start bringing substances into your trauma,
mhm,
it's only going to get worse. You absolutely have to stop that nonsense.
mhm.
Just because it's legal doesn't make it right.
And, the term,
You
I
got me
won't
off
keep.
on a tangent.
That's okay.
Sorry.
I won't keep you too much longer, but, I've used the term legal kidnapping, and I've gotten chewed out about it. But the thing is also Senator Nancy Schaefer used the term legal kidnapping, and you probably are aware of her story, but it is called legal kidnapping, apparently, even though it is illegal.
How about court nap?
Court
My
napped.
child was court napped.
Mhm.
There's so many different terms, and
Mhm.
I hope that at some point we can build a glossary, but for right now, I'm just using them all. And if you look at any social media platform at Teri Yaki Cahoon, you'll see that most of my posts that are focused on helping build the mental health of our surviving community is focused on pretty much every hashtag I can find. The controversial ones, the dads, the moms, the target parent, the erased parent, estranged parent, alienated parent, protective parent, the moms, the dads, everybody. I just put them all in there, as many as that platform will let me use right now,
Mhm.
because we don't have a glossary. And while I'd like to see that happen, I'd rather focus on healing journeys, healing systems, and therapy modules, and
Excellent.
advocating for lesbians to be aware of what this government is doing to us and to our children. We are literally being used as womb slaves.
Mhm.
All
Mhm.
you got to do, pay $30 for a marriage license, and that's literally how much it costs to buy somebody else's child. $30 a head,
I'm sure people
or
have said
whatever your state fee is.
well, I'm sure people have said to you, "Isn't this like the Handmaid's Tale, that series they had on Hulu?"
Mm. I, mm, there's a lot of similarities. There's also a show on Netflix called The Maid
Yes. Yes.
that shows the horror of how easy it is to steal somebody's child.
Mhm.
Also, there's a historical fiction series about the King of England and how he used politics to abandon his first wife, married his cousin for political reasons, had her executed. There's a lot in history that shows where our system comes from. Pay attention to
Exactly.
history because it
Mhm.
does repeat itself.
Right. Right. Now, could you tell me your website again if parents want to reach out to you?
I don't have a website. I use social media right now. There's a WordPress blog, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter. It's all under at Teri Yaki Cahoon, or you can use the hashtag Protective Parents Chaplain. Erased Moms Chaplain is where it started, so that one will come up as well. And
Okay.
the book is on Amazon. I'll get
I
organized eventually, but I'm just not an extremely administrative person.
well, you have a lot going on, and I can completely understand. I completely understand.
Right now, I don't even know where I'm going to live in 3 months, because if the court doesn't stop this cycle of abuse, my children will be moved again,
Mhm.
and I will then be living 4 hours away from them. Am I supposed to move again when it has
Mhm.
taken me the last 2.5 years to build what I have here? Again, every time I lose children with my children, and my job just gets thrown under the bus.
Mm.
And then they
I'm s
mock me for not having a lot of money. I'm like, really? Do you
Mhm.
not see why?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's
Oh, I'm
bonkers.
I'm so glad you came onto my show and gave us a lot of excellent information. And so, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again with Teri, because I know I'm going to have her back on my show again as a return guest and other guests as well. And I thank you again, Teri Yaki. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for taking time, and thank you for letting me speak to a lot of moms who hear stories like this all the time. And before you end it, make sure that after you hear any of these stories, stop and ask your higher power, what can I do with this story? How can I use it? Please help me heal.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Bye.